what if I told you that Arkham City's final boss fight against Clayface was initially going to feature a completely unused and never before seen enemy type that could literally eat you? Or how about that Electrocutioner, instead of being, well, whatever this is, was planned to be a genuine boss to go up against here in Arkham Origins? Or even that us players were originally going to have a full-on actual boss battle against Batman himself during the ending of Arkham Knight.
Are you ready, Joker? It's your turn to feel fear!
The Batman Arkham games have a ton of cut content, and the boss fights are definitely no exception because there are so many battles that either got removed from the games entirely, or were changed so drastically that they're almost unrecognizable compared to the original plans. You might ask, how do we know this? Well, I've spent these past 7 months researching and working with some of the best data miners and modders within the Arkham community to discover, and in some cases restore, any and all of this deleted, unused, and reworked content specifically related to boss fights. Even though this has been a project and a half, I'm happy to say that in the end, the final result was all worth it, because this video contains so much cut content that is either not well known within the Arkham community, or has never before been seen publicly. Yeah, if you're any kind of a Batman Arkham fan, we've got some stuff here that will actually blow your mind, I'm not even kidding. A bit of a side note, but I want to get this out of the way now. You'll definitely notice that a couple of these boss battles did end up making it into the final release in some shape or form, meaning they technically weren't unused entirely, and you have actually played against a few of these guys yourself. With that said, if they did make it into an Arkham game without getting cut altogether, I've chosen to only include bosses that received major reworks and had lots of content cut within their battles, such as removed attacks and abilities, cancelled phases to the boss, an alternate arena for the boss to take place in. Basically, the fight was originally going to look and feel completely different from what we ultimately got. So with that out of the way, I hope you're ready, because while it definitely is sad to see all of the incredible bosses we missed out on, it's also super interesting at the same time. So sit back, relax, hit the thumbs up because that helps a lot, and here are 15 boss fights that got cut from the Batman Arkham series. Number 1. Harley Quinn's cut boss battle from Arkham Knight. Have you ever thought to yourself that Harley's ending to the movie studios section was a bit underwhelming gameplay-wise? I mean, come on, throughout this entire level of Arkham Knight, we had so many large predator and combat encounters, tutorials for dual fighting with Robin, hand-to-hand boss fights, almost as if it was building up to something big, only to end with you just instantly defeating Harley by doing a single takedown on her, beating one last group of thugs, and that's it. Well, the movie studios section of the game wasn't always planned to conclude like that. In Arkham Knight's game files, Mr. Jag was actually able to uncover a lot of completely unused Harley Quinn dialogue lines that appear to reference some sort of stealth encounter involving Harley, which definitely wasn't present in the final release.
Oh, what are you gonna do now, doofus? You can't get any closer without me seeing. You may as well go home. Or come here and let me shoot you both dead. I don't mind. How'd you do that? No, no, no! No! You're not supposed to do that! You ain't sneaking up on me, you bad-faced freak!
So yes, it seems like Harley was initially supposed to have her very own Predator boss battle to conclude the Panessa Studios section of the game, presumably like her stealth encounter in Arkham City's DLC, as opposed to this one-button press fight that we actually ended up getting in Arkham Knight. But this wouldn't have been just any stealth boss though. There's even more cut dialogue lines, and in these ones, Harley mentions both Batman and Robin multiple times, almost as if they're fighting her together, which means this likely was a one-of-its-kind dual-play Predator boss. Take a listen.
Where'd you come from, bad freaks? What do you think you're doing? Aw, look, it's little Robin! Trying to sneak up on me, huh, Robin? Oh, I see you, bad brain! Oh, look, it's the little birdie!
Yeah, you ever wonder why Harley was so hyped up, only to be defeated in a single button press? You ever wonder why she has this big new fancy gun that she's constantly carrying around but never uses? You ever wonder why the game had multiple tutorials teaching you how to do Batman and Robin stealth takedowns and dual play Predator fights during the movie studio section, by the way, only for there to never be any more of these encounters throughout the entire game? Because it was all meant to set up a final boss fight between Harley Quinn and the dynamic duo duo to finish off the Panessa Studios part of Arkham Knight. Or at least, that's my speculation, because I guess we can't be 100% sure, but with the cut dialogue and everything else lining up, I think it's all but a guarantee. So, if there really was going to be a dual-play stealth boss against Harley at Panessa, how would it have worked, and where exactly would it have taken place? Well, if you go to Quinn's evidence locker inside of the GCPD, Aaron Cash confirms that Harley's new weapon is actually a modified machine gun with a grenade launcher attached to the bottom of it.
One machine gun haphazardly duct-taped to a grenade launcher.
I think the most likely option is that Harley would use the machine gun on you when either Batman or Robin gets spotted, and on the other hand, use frequent grenades for when you're not detected to sort of guess where you are and try to get some free damage against the player. Basically, very similar to Mr. Freeze's whole attack arsenal in Arkham City, right? That's just my own theorizing though. But yeah, if Harley truly was going to have both a machine gun and be able to shoot grenades at you in a stealth encounter, I think those would be some pretty intense mechanics to go up against, I'm not even gonna lie. Now, as for where the boss fight would have been, my best guess is that the room Harley walks out of to confront Robin would have originally been a fully fleshed out Predator map rather than a small little Riddler room, so that way you would still have the same combat fight, go into the room and defeat Harley in a stealth battle, and then it could end the same way with Batman carrying her back into the main room to trigger the cutscene. Who knows though, maybe it was in a completely separate room that was cut from the game entirely, or maybe the devs were even planning on just reusing the Predator map outside of Panessa. Doesn't really make sense as to why Harley would be out there again, but you never know. Regardless of how it would have gone down or where it would have taken place though, a stealth-based dual-play boss battle playing as both Batman and Robin going up against Harley Quinn and her gunmen to wrap up the movie studios would have been awesome, especially considering 1, the total lack of dual-play Predator in general, and 2, the fact that we never ended up getting a dual-play boss revolving around stealth instead of combat. It would have been a one of its kind within the Arkham games. Unfortunately, a really cool boss fight idea like this being cut from Arkham Knight isn't just a one-time thing either, because as we make our way through this video, you'll definitely notice a recurring theme that the game had so many great boss fights originally. I would go as far to say that it very well could have been considered the best in the series as far as bosses go, had the devs been given more time to finish the game and see out their vision to its entirety. Number 2. Clayface's original final boss battle cut from Arkham City. Alright, we have a ton of stuff to talk about related to Clayface's boss fight here, so buckle up because what we've managed to restore has never been seen before by the Arkham community. Now, with that said, let's just start with the info that's already sort of public knowledge that you might have already heard about. Clayface's completely different setup to the boss fight. So we all know how Clayface was secretly filling in for Joker while he was sick, until finally revealing himself to actually be Clayface at the end of the game, leading into the boss fight itself, right? Well, in major contrast to this, the original plan was to actually have Clayface pretend to be Talia al Ghul instead. Yeah, he was supposed to impersonate Talia in this scene, which definitely would have been very interesting. In fact, Ice Mage, one of the biggest Arkham modders who you've probably heard of already, was even able to restore this Clayface Talia character model back into the game while he was mid-transformation, which gives us a pretty good idea of what this alternate Clay transformation could have looked like had it not been cut from Arkham City. I really don't know how Ice Mage did it, but this looks absolutely insane. Really cool to just be able to examine the whole Talia to Clayface transformation inside of Arkham City's character viewer. Now, outside of this character model and what's already been confirmed by data miners though, we don't really know how this transformation would have played out in the story. My guess is that Clayface was originally going to be both Joker and Talia in this situation, where the real Talia al Ghul was maybe being held hostage by Joker in the second row, but hey, that's just speculation. So yeah, completely different setup to the fight, which I think would have been super interesting, but we've got a lot more cut content within the actual boss fight itself to talk about too. You remember the little clay guys that you fight during the third and final section of Clayface's boss battle, where Batman uses Talia's sword to just mow through them all? Well, in the game files, these enemies are specifically labeled as thin drones, and the reason I bring that up is because Ice Mage was actually able to find files related to a completely unused model called fat drones instead, which definitely sounds like an alternate enemy type, doesn't it? In fact, he got me a lot more than just this screenshot, because you will not believe what he was able to restore. here he is in all of his glory. Just so you know, this is the first time this dude has ever been shown publicly before, which is just really cool, right? Now, this fat drone would have been a second enemy type to fight against alongside of all of the thin drones, obviously during the sword section of Clayface's boss fight. And yeah, this guy was massive. In case you need a quick size comparison, here's what he looks like next to both Batman and the normal Clayface enemies, and here's what he looks like standing next to a Titan. Absolutely insane. Now, outside of just looking cool, there's also a legitimate reason this fat drone was so big compared to Batman, because it's actually since he had one really interesting ability. He was going to be able to literally eat you. Yep, the files reference a hug move where he would have been able to grab you, pick you up, and shove Batman into his mouth, which is just insane. Now, being made of clay and all though, he obviously would have been affected if Batman were to throw a freeze blast at him, right? Well, once again, here's what he would have looked like normally, and here's what he would have looked like frozen instead. Yeah, definitely really cool. Once again, massive shout out to Ice Mage. It's insane that he was able to restore all of this for me to record and show off to you all. Unfortunately though, outside of what I mentioned, we just don't have much more info on this guy's moveset. He has no animations, no locomotion, and just very few details within the game files outside of his character model and the one grab attack, since most of it did end up getting deleted. It's sad to see because he seemed like an extremely fun and unique enemy type that would have been a great addition, but even though we can't actually fight against him, I will say that he makes for a really cool playable skin over Batman, even if he doesn't have any actual animations. Hold up, you thought we were done? Well, not only was there going to be this second type of drone enemy during Clayface's boss fight, the fat drones, on the other hand, the thin drones, which are the ones that actually made it into the final release of Arkham City, were originally planned to be much more complex than the ones we got. In the release version, the thin drones don't really do much, right? I mean, sure, they can flail their arms around as a basic attack, but really, other than that, what else is there? Nothing. In the development process though, these little guys were initially designed to have their own grab attacks, which we know about because there's still some animations of this move left in the game files. As you can see here, the clay drones were going to be very similar to the lunatic enemies in Arkham Asylum, where they'd actually have the ability to jump on your back and deal damage. This would even lead into the exact same struggle animation that was used for the lunatics in Asylum as well, forcing the player to button mash until Batman was eventually able to throw them off, which definitely would have been interesting to face in a sword fight combat encounter, I can't lie. Basically, it seems like the Clayface enemies were the official grappler enemy type of Arkham City, being able to grab you, jump on you, the big guy being able to literally eat you, you know, all that sort of stuff. With that said, the lunatic grab attack was far from the only thing that was cut from the thin drone's moveset though, because according to Ice Mage, they were also supposed to have some sort of exploding ability, which you can kind of see for yourself in this animation, besides the actual explosion at the end of course. Yeah, Ice Mage and I don't really know what exactly this is for. My best guess is that it was some sort of kamikaze attack where the clay enemies would try to run up to you and explode, dealing damage to Batman at the cost of sacrificing themselves, but that's all just my own speculation. Now, one final strange ability that these skinny Clayface enemies had was some sort of power down move. Once again, Ice Mage and I aren't too sure what this could have possibly been and what use it had in game, but it's an unused, unique ability for the thin drones where they'd literally just slow down until coming to a complete stop, where they'd then just sway back and forth a little, not doing anything, hence the whole power down. Let me know what you think this could have possibly been meant for, because I sure have no idea. So yeah, as you can clearly see, the thin drones in Clayface's boss fight were originally going to have so much more complexity to them instead of just being a basic enemy who had one move to use against you. I'm not sure why so much of this ended up getting removed from their arsenal, because it seems like the thin drone's larger moveset with unique attacks and special abilities would have been really fun to go up against in a sword fight, but hey, it's far too late now anyways, so let's just enjoy looking back on what could have been. That's still not all though, because not only were they planned to have a much more complex moveset, but what if I told you that these same clay enemies were also supposed to be much more attuned to Batman's full moveset as well? In Arkham City's final release, if you try to capestun a thin drone, it just makes him fall over, which is kind of weird and useless considering that you can't even ground take down the Clayface thugs, right? Well, as you can see here in this unused animation, originally this was planned to just stun them like every other enemy, which probably means you could have done beatdowns on him, aerial attacks, and much more than what is actually possible in Arkham City now. Another thing, remember that area of effect attack where if you use a special combo takedown, Batman just sort of slices and dices his way through a bunch of these Clay guys? Yeah, well, that wasn't actually going to be able to take out multiple of Clayface's thin drones initially, but rather work exactly like a normal special combo takedown where it only targets and defeats one enemy. Honestly, out of everything that was cut out of Clayface's section, especially to do with Clay enemies themselves, this is the first time where I'm kinda glad that a move was changed and repurposed into what it is today, because it is just so fun to shred dozens of Clayface goons to bits with a single button press. And with that, I think we've officially made it through all of the cut content related to Clayface's boss battle. Now, I don't have anything to prove this, but considering that the Clayface drones were originally supposed to be fully fleshed out enemy types that had totally unique attacks and abilities, reactions to Batman's full moveset, as well as feature an entirely different enemy called the Fat Drones that clearly had a lot of work put into him as well before he was cut, it seems highly likely that this section in Clayface's boss fight where Batman uses Talia's sword was originally supposed to be a lot longer than what we ended up getting. I mean, literally, just think about it from a pure logical standpoint. Does it really make sense to create two entirely new enemy types, make them fully compatible with pretty much every attack in Batman's arsenal, give them their own unique attacks, mechanics, and such to use against the player, only for them to end up being nothing more than a single 2-minute fight where these guys aren't even the main focus, but rather just a distraction before getting to Clayface himself? Plus, if the Fat Drones were going to be massive and have the ability to eat you and whatnot, I don't think there'd even be enough space for such a crowded fight to take place in such a small room like this, where you obviously still need enough space to throw freeze blasts at Clayface. I don't know, everything here just seems to point to the fact that something much larger involving Clayface was being planned. Maybe the Clayface goons would have been a part of the entire fight in Monarch Theater instead of just at the very end. Maybe we were originally supposed to get Batman with a sword as a selectable, playable character in Riddler's Revenge, and there would be dedicated challenge maps for these Clayface enemies? Who knows, but once again, with how much work was clearly put into these Clayface drones, there was almost definitely going to be some other, much larger usage for them that ended up getting cut from the game before release. Number 3. Killer Croc's second boss battle that got cut from Arkham Origins. So as we know, at the very beginning of the game when you first take control of Batman, you have to make your way through Blackgate Prison in pursuit of Black Mask, who happens to have his very own bodyguard, Killer Croc, and you do end up fighting him at the very end of the section. Now this boss fight is literally just a tutorial boss. Keep stuns, beatdowns, batarangs, and that's it. Very basic stuff until you eventually defeat him, kind of making Croc's character a bit underwhelming in my opinion. Well, what if I told you that this wasn't originally going to be the last time you fought Croc, and that he was going to have a final boss battle later on into the game? At the very end of Arkham Origins, you end up returning to Blackgate to stop a prison riot. When you're making your way through the cell blocks, after you talk to Deathstroke, you have to go through one round of combat, a second round of combat immediately after, and once you've cleared both rooms, you can finally reach the Panopticon for the cutscene. Well, this second fight before the Panopticon wasn't supposed to be a regular combat encounter at all. No, it was actually supposed to be another fight against Killer Croc. How do we know this? Well, some of the Arkham modders were actually able to get their hands on a pre-alpha build of Arkham Origins, which is an early version of the game while it was still in development for those who don't know. So huge thank you to Wolf Gaming. All of the pre-alpha footage you're about to see in this section was recorded by them. We can clearly see some of the ideas for this part of the game before they were completely changed prior to the final release of Arkham Origins. Now, as soon as you'd walk into the Panopticon access room, you'd meet face to face with Croc, who is currently mauling an enforcer at the moment. After Croc finished with the enforcer, Batman and him would have a little back and forth through dialogue, and then the boss battle would commence. The problem? This wasn't going to be a unique boss fight at all. It was legitimately just a copy-paste of Croc's exact tutorial boss fight thrown in at the end of the game, aside from two small differences. There weren't any canisters for Croc to throw at you like he did on the rooftop fight, and this time around there would be more thugs to attack you alongside Croc, which you can't see in the pre-alpha, but I'm told they were intended to be implemented. Basically, imagine the exact same combat encounter we got in the final release of Arkham Origins, just with Killer Croc thrown into the mix instead of the enforcer, because yeah, Croc was supposed to eat that guy before the fight began. Once you cleared the room and successfully defeated Croc, Batman would just leave him there unconscious, which does play into the story. You see, remember how Croc makes a brief cameo after the TN1 Bane boss where he grabs Batman, gets hit with a sniper bullet, and then makes a run for it? Well, in the pre-alpha, since Batman had obviously knocked out Croc by this point, he was never supposed to show up here for that cameo originally. In fact, this whole scene was planned to go down slightly differently, because as soon as you arrive, Gordon was supposed to already be by the warden's side instead of coming in from the top to take out the sniper, which means you would have actually had to deal with the sniper yourself while in the middle of a team-up encounter with Gordon. Once again, huge shout out to Wolf Gaming for letting me use all of this pre-alpha footage. When I first saw that this was the original way Killer Croc was going to be used during the end of the game in Blackgate, instead of having him make that brief cameo, I was of the mindset that it would have been kind of stupid to just copy-paste a literal tutorial boss fight into the finale with no innovation whatsoever, and was honestly glad it got cut. But I don't know, thinking of it from the perspective that Croc would have been more of a mini-boss at this stage of the game to fight alongside a bunch of prisoners in place of the Enforcer guy kinda sounds intriguing. I think it could have made this encounter much more interesting and definitely harder to beat. Then again, there's already a combat boss battle with Bane literally right after this fight though, so it was probably for the best that they cut Croc's second boss battle for pacing purposes and just replaced him with another Enforcer instead. Number 4. Jason Todd's original final boss battle that was cut from Arkham Knight. Now, as we know, during the last part of the Arkham Knight HQ mission, Jason reveals his identity to Batman, turns his dual pistols into a sniper rifle, and then we're thrown right into a full-on stealth boss fight against our former ally. Unfortunately, Red Hood's battle, at least in the release version of Arkham Knight, ended up being fairly simple. All you have to do is avoid Jason's deadly sniper vision to sneak up under his gargoyle, grapple up to surprise him, and then do that 3 more times to defeat him. Obviously, you still have to deal with enemies and drones throughout the fight as well, but Jason himself doesn't really do much, especially for a final boss battle against a character who was so built up. Well, turns out this fight was planned to be a lot more complex than what we ended up getting, and I would even go as far to say that this had major potential to be the best boss battle in the entire Arkham series. I'm dead serious. Thanks to Darksheep, who was able to uncover loads of unused animations and such in the game files, he discovered a lot of aspects of this fight that got cut from Jason's moveset, and we have a pretty good idea as to what the concept was for this boss originally. You see, the overall premise still remained the same. Sneak under Jason's gargoyle and grapple up to deal damage. However, instead of Jason just sitting stationary on a single gargoyle waiting for Batman to show himself, it would have actually been the complete opposite. Red Hood was supposed to have the ability to grapple around using a zipline gadget that was attached to his gun, allowing him to quickly move from one vantage point to another. We even have the animations of this zipline gadget, where you can see Jason crouched on a gargoyle, turn away from his sniping position and aim his gun at another gargoyle, and then completely zip over to a different vantage point extremely fast. Now obviously that's a really cool mechanic that I definitely wish had made it into the final game, because that right there would have instantly added so much more complexity to how you plan your stealth and how you get under Jason's gargoyle. With that said, it's also not the only form of movement Jason was supposed to have though, because some cut sections of the fight involved Red Hood getting off of his vantage point and hunting down Batman on foot. Yep, I'm not even kidding. To get off his gargoyle, Jason would have attached a grappling hook onto his vantage point, swung himself over the side, sliding down the rope and landing on the ground like this, sniper in hand. Now that he's on the ground, he would have been trying to track down the player and kill Batman on foot, which is complemented by the fact that we can clearly see he has multiple unused walking animations. Patrolling the room while holding his sniper rifle, lots of turning around movements where he's glancing over his shoulder, climbing up and down ladders, yeah, he could do it all. It seems like this part of the fight was very similar to both Mr. Freeze from Arkham City and TN1 Bane from Arkham Origins, a stealth encounter where you're not the predator, but rather the prey. I can't be sure, so don't take this as a fact, but how I think Jason's on-foot segments would have worked is that it was a scripted part of the fight where he'd jump off his gargoyle during a certain phase or phases to track you down himself. Who knows though, maybe it was designed to be something like if it took the player too long to get under Jason's gargoyle, he would have gotten tired of waiting in a sniper position and would come down to the floor level as a sort of punishment for not being quick enough? Like I said, we simply don't know. Now obviously, these sections with Jason tracking on foot wouldn't have lasted forever though. After some time, likely if you escaped him for long enough, Red Hood would have made his way back under a gargoyle, grappling up to a vantage point, and then the hunt would end and Jason would have taken a sniping position once again. Okay, can I just say that that is absolutely insane? I can't believe they just cut the coolest part of Red Hood's boss fight out and removed it entirely. But what if I told you that's still not all? You see, like I said, to progress the boss fight, the way to deal damage to Jason still was to sneak under his vantage point and grapple up, much like in the final game. However, instead of these sections in between phases just being short little cutscenes of Batman and Red Hood interacting, they were actually going to be fully fledged QuickTime events where you had to physically counter, punch. You know, things like the Christina Bell encounter or any of the dual play boss fights. We also have some footage of what these QTEs could have looked like had they not been cut. Instead of just staying on the gargoyle before Jason uses a smoke bomb during these sections, it appears that Batman was originally going to knock Red Hood off of the vantage point every time, and then the QuickTime event would occur while both of them were on the ground. As you can see in some of these animations, it's Jason who's getting a brutal beatdown from Batman, while in another, it's Jason who's winning the fight and beating down Bruce instead, likely if you failed the QTE. Also, remember that damage done to the front of Red Hood's mask in the final cutscene? That wasn't just supposed to appear as a result of landing on the ground. No, Batman was going to be the one who caused that damage in one of these QuickTime events. So yeah, it really does seem like this boss fight was meant to be an extremely intense back and forth between student and master through and through, all the way until arriving at the very end. When the player grapples up on Jason's gargoyle for the fourth and final time, this would have originally triggered the last QuickTime event. Red Hood would attack, a counter prompt would show, and if you countered, the boss fight would end exactly like it did in the release version of the game, with both Batman and Jason falling from the vantage point, slamming into the floor, cue the cutscene. Wow, now that would have been one amazing boss fight. Like I said, we simply don't know the hows. How would Jason track you around? Could he use his own version of detective mode? Could he follow you through grates and chase you with his zipline across the gargoyles? How long would he sit perched on top of a vantage point before he came down to the floor level? And how long would he track you down on foot before heading back up? Was there any way to attack him while he was on foot, or was the goal just to run away? All of these are things we'll probably never know, unfortunately, but what we do know is that it seems like Rocksteady was planning on going all out for this boss battle. Red Hood zipping around different gargoyles, Batman being hunted on foot by his former ally, multiple QuickTime events with intense back and forths where you're fighting Jason hand to hand. The full version of the Arkham Knight's fight was going to be amazing. Once again, huge shout out to Darksheep for data mining and discovering all of this in the first place. It's really cool to see in hindsight, but also kinda sad that the devs ended up cutting most of these complex aspects for what I would assume were time constraints, leaving just the absolute basics. I mean, considering how close all of this was to being finished and put into the final game, it's just so disappointing because this truly did have potential to be the greatest boss in the entire Arkham series. Number 5. Scarecrow's cut content within all of his Arkham Asylum boss battles. Okay, another boss fight that wasn't entirely cut from the game, but did end up having a lot of cut aspects that would have made him look and feel completely different while playing through. Although, when I say that these fear toxin-induced nightmare sections were meant to look different, I'm not talking about gameplay-wise. The boss battles were still structured the same, with Batman making his way through the obstacles to eventually reach the Bat Signal, all while avoiding giant Scarecrow's vision, who's trying his best to hunt him down. Rather, what I am talking about is, yes, literally a complete visual overhaul, because this is what Scarecrow's boss fights look like in the final release of Arkham Asylum, but here's what he originally looked like while the game was still in development. Pretty cool, right? Apparently, Batman Arkham Asylum was planned to have a lot more blood throughout the entire game to match its super dark, gritty atmosphere, and the Scarecrow boss fights were no different. In fact, the tornado that surrounds the entire level was going to be made of this blood red color. Yeah, you were actually going to be inside of a literal blood tornado while Scarecrow's trying to kill you, I'm not even kidding. Unfortunately for us though, the reason this didn't turn out to be in the final version of Arkham Asylum is because Rocksteady ended up deciding to tone everything down before release, you know, since rating issues and wanting to keep the game PG-13. So with that being said, that meant this blood red color palette for the whole tornado had to go, and it was officially removed on December 11th, 2008, about half a year before launch, and then switched out to what it is today. I'm sure you're wondering though, how do we even know this if it was a feature cut back in 2008, and how did we manage to restore all of this back into the game? Well, you can thank Ice Mage for that. I don't know how he did it, but he pulled it off. According to him, there was also a very high chance that these Scarecrow sections were literally going to be raining blood on top of the already bloody tornado whirling around you, which just sounds awesome, but obviously this was a removed feature since, again, too much blood. Yeah, such a shame that all of this had to be cut. I mean, this thing, simply put, looks absolutely sick. The Scarecrow sections are already terrifying enough as is. Imagine how much creepier they could have been with an atmosphere like this instead. Now, while that complete visual overhaul is incredibly cool and all, we're still not done talking about Scarecrow, oh no. You see, not only were his 3 main boss fights going to look very different, but there might have also been an alternate Scarecrow boss battle that was cut entirely from the game as well. Thanks to Back to Life, who was able to send me some very interesting stuff, Scarecrow appears to have some unused and unfinished cutscenes that were buried in the game files. Take a look. So yeah, it seems like there was definitely a scrapped Scarecrow section in Arkham Asylum that involved these cutscenes, and Back to Life says that they could have potentially been meant for a boss fight that was cut from the game. Now, I myself wouldn't doubt if that's the case, considering that every time Crane shows up in the game, it's for a boss fight, so it definitely seems possible that all of this cut content was meant to lead up into a 4th encounter with Crane at some point in between his other 3 encounters for yet another boss battle. Who knows though, it also could have been a scrapped part of his original 3 boss fights that was completely changed and reworked into what we know as the Nightmare segments today. Maybe it would have been an introduction to his character early on into the game that was planned to be different than what we ended up getting in the final release. We really have no idea, but it is still very interesting to see this kind of stuff all these years later. Once again though, huge shout out to Ice Mage, who put a lot of work into this and was somehow able to restore all of these unused blood tornado effects back into Arkham Asylum for me to record and show off to you all here. I just can't get over how cool this level looks compared to the final game. While I can understand why Rocksteady felt the need to tone the visuals down and pull back on some of the blood, like I said, I really do wish this hadn't have been removed. Number 6. Electrocutioner's actual boss battle that was cut from Arkham Origins. Now, this next scrapped boss fight is extremely interesting because this time around, we actually have the direct word from a developer to confirm it. So as we know, when you're going through Penguin's ship early on into the game, it's not long before you encounter Electrocutioner, one of the 8 assassins, in the ship's boiler room, right? Well, he has a full-on dedicated cutscene here as if to set up some massive fight between him and Batman, has a health bar when the two are face to face, and it really does seem like some big boss battle is about to occur, only for it to be a fake out where Electrocutioner gets one-tapped instantly with a single kick to the face, turning his character into the meme he is today. Well, Electrocutioner's showdown wasn't always planned to go down this way. You see, a while back while I was searching around for cut Arkham bosses online, I happened to stumble upon an old and buried tweet coming from WB Montreal's lead system designer, one of the guys who worked on Arkham Origins. In this tweet, he talks about how both drones and medics were scrapped enemy types from Origins because they were just too similar to what Rocksteady was doing with Arkham Knight, which is very cool in itself, and I'll definitely talk about that in further detail sometime in the future. But by far the most interesting thing here is the fact that he also said, quote, Electrocutioner was supposed to be a boss fight, but very early we knew we couldn't do another at the quality we were targeting. So yes, Electrocutioner was initially planned to be a full-on boss battle for Arkham Origins, but it unfortunately ended up getting cut from the game very early on into development, most likely for time or budget reasons. Now this makes total sense. Like I said, Electrocutioner is really hyped up to be some big boss with a pre-rendered cutscene, an actual health bar, all that sort of stuff, but just doesn't end up amounting to anything, so a cut fight definitely lines up. Outside of this one tweet, we have absolutely zero knowledge of what the original concept was for exactly where you'd fight him, how you'd fight him, you know, things like that, or if the devs had even gotten that far before rejecting him as a boss, which they probably didn't, but I will say that it's nice to know that he wasn't always intended to be nothing more than a joke. Still unfortunate though, while I am happy with the boss fights fights we got in Arkham Origins, Electrocutioner is the only one of the 8 assassins who didn't get his own boss battle, and I think there's a lot of different directions they could have taken to make the fight really good. Number 7. Victor Zsasz' side mission and boss battle that got cut from Arkham Knight. Now, Zsasz and all of his cut content, at least other than the actual removed boss fight itself, is something that I've talked a lot about on the channel, and I've even done an entire dedicated video on him already. With that said, if you haven't watched my old video, I definitely recommend it, but here's what you need to know as a short little summary. Zsasz was initially going to have his own dedicated side mission in Arkham Knight, but it was unfortunately cut from the game before release, this proven by the fact that he has a completely unused character profile image like the rest of the villains, an unfinished Zsasz-themed evidence display stored out of bounds directly under the GCPD that Mr. Jag was somehow able to find and point out to me, and Zsasz even has a bunch of unused dialogue lines that can be found buried in the game files.
Ever held a razor to your wrist, Batman? Allow me the pleasure.
Like I said, I've previously tried to piece together as much as I could of this mission using all of the unused Zsasz dialogue and other evidence, where the side mission would have likely started on top of the Elliott Memorial Hospital for a crime scene investigation, tracked Zsasz through the city by finding his path of dead bodies left behind him, until eventually discovering his hideout, which one of my theories was that it could have been this back room at Panessa Studios. Not only is this the only unused room in the entire game, which would make sense if it were originally meant for a cut villain, but on the Clock Tower's camera feed, Zsasz can also be seen near the movie studios, walking in the exact same direction too. Anyways, that's all speculation though, so what we do know is that whatever the mission was, it ultimately would have led to a boss fight against Zsasz, Batman defeating him, and then taking him back to the GCPD for lockup. Now, how exactly would that boss fight have played out though? Well, I had no clue when I first made the Zsasz cut content video, but now, I think we actually have a pretty good idea thanks to Ice Mage and Darksheep, who were able to find some very interesting things through data mining. You see, in Arkham Knight's game files, there are a good chunk of animations that have just been randomly thrown into Pig's folder. Thomas Wayne is completely unrelated, by the way. That's just the character model Ice Mage was using to show off the animations to me. He doesn't have a cut boss fight against Bruce or anything like that, unfortunately. Now, all of these animations are unnamed, meaning they're not specifically titled as a part of Pig's moveset. Pig never actually uses any of these in his boss fight, and none of the animations really fit Pig anyways because his character model is much different proportionally for obvious reasons. Basically, there's a ton of completely unused attacks, taunts, and things like that lying around inside of Pig's folder that aren't actually meant for him, but rather somebody else who wields a small, one-handed weapon. Who is that somebody else? Victor Zsasz. When we were first unsure of who these could possibly be for, Ice Mage was able to input Zsasz's character model from Arkham City so that we could watch him perform these animations just for a visual reference to see if it lined up, and what we discovered, the body language, posing, walking style, it's all a total match for Zsasz. On top of that, Zsasz's knife is a perfect fit for the small weapon being wielded in the character's right hand too, and I was even able to take some of Zsasz's cut dialogue, line it up with this specific animation, and the timing of how long both the animation plays and how long the dialogue line is, as well as the inflections in his voice during specific movements. I mean, it all completely aligns together.
I will cut your death into my flesh.
Apparently, the reason all of this was even in Pig's folder is because it's likely that when Zsasz's side mission was scrapped from the game, a lot of his stuff was then repurposed for Pig's side mission, which does make a ton of sense and is very interesting in itself. But want to know something even more interesting? Since we now have a bunch of unused attacking and taunting animations that we're 99.9% sure are meant for Zsasz, we can kind of piece together how Zsasz's boss fight was originally planned to go down before it got cut from the game entirely. Okay, so first off, Zsasz was obviously a combat boss fight. The animations clearly point to hand-to-hand fighting, and Zsasz's cut dialogue also sounds more like a combat encounter as opposed to something like stealth, just for some added proof.
Come, let death take you.
We can also see that Zsasz had multiple counters to Batman's moveset. If you tried to ground take down him, he'd be able to roll away and dodge the attack. If you tried to beat down him, Zsasz could fully block the final hit instead of it being an instant knockout like normal. Then we also have this strange combo attack from Batman where he does 3 punches followed by a cape stun. My guess is that this was a scripted part of the fight where once you fought Zsasz for long enough, you'd be able to transition into this move leading into a beatdown to actually deal some massive damage damage to Zaz's health bar, kind of like what happens with Ra's al Ghul in Arkham City or Deathstroke in Arkham Origins, just for reference. This wouldn't be the end of the fight though, because the beatdown would likely only take away a portion of Zaz's total health bar, since he could obviously block the final hit like we were talking about. Plus, we of course have this Zaz recovery animation as well, as if Batman had just finished doing an attack on him and it clearly hadn't taken him out just yet. So yes, based on all of these attack animations, it seems like this was a multiple phase boss fight, likely having to beat down Zaz 4 or 5 times before he's actually defeated. The fact that Zaz had counters like dodging your ground takedowns or blocking the end of your beatdowns is honestly really cool. Makes it seem like this fight was going to be a pretty intense back and forth. But wait, even with my absolutely stellar explanation, it's kinda hard to get the full picture with me just showing random animations on screen, so instead of just telling you about all of this, I think it'd be better to actually show you. I've done my best here to sort of reconstruct Zaz's boss battle itself and the entire ending sequence as well, so you can actually see for yourself what Zaz's cut mission would have looked like had it made it into the final game. Cut dialogue lines, unused attack animations that we green screened, and everything else all pieced together. So without further ado, here's the final result.
If you killed anyone tonight, tell me now.
It's hard to tell, Batman. So many cuts in my flesh. But I'm saving a place just for you.
You'll never kill again, Zaz. I promise.
As sure as the earth moves, my tapestry of death will continue. Come, let death take you. I'll make it painless, Batman. I will cut your death into my flesh. My skin aches for your mark. Your pitiful existence ends now! No. No!
I'm locking you away, Zaz.
You condemn them to misery, Batman. I offer death.
You're a psychotic killer. You belong behind bars.
Wretched beasts. Every one of them. They search for meaning where there is none to be found.
What matters is we never give up. We keep fighting.
A fight you will lose.
Wanna bet? Welcome home, Zaz.
You haven't found a prison to hold me yet. When the walls of this prison crumble, Batman, it's cutting time.
Wow, how about that? I know, it looks kinda gimmicky at certain parts, and obviously the boss fight itself would have been a lot longer, but I think I did a pretty good job reconstructing all of the cut content from scratch, I can't lie. I just wish we had more in terms of actual fighting animations between Batman and Zaz though, because those are kinda limited, but obviously it never got finished because the mission was cut during development, and we'll probably never know the full picture. Okay, hold up, pause for a moment. Remember how I said that while I highly doubt they were meant for a different character, we still can't be 100% sure that all of these animations were intended specifically for Zaz since they're technically unnamed? Well, on the off chance that they weren't for Zaz's boss fight, another character they could have been meant for was Prometheus. Now, Prometheus is essentially an anti-Batman. He had his parents gunned down by the police right in front of him, trained and mastered the ways of murder, and dedicated his life to destroy the law. He never makes any appearances in the Arkhamverse outside of a few small references, but it wasn't always going to be like that because he was actually another cut villain from Arkham Knight who was supposed to have his very own dedicated Season of Infamy side mission. How do we know this? Well, in the game folders, you can actually find a text file that gives a brief overview of all of the side missions and Season of Infamy. Funnily enough, Prometheus's is still here, albeit a very limited amount of info compared to the others. So based on this, the overall premise of the mission was to stop Prometheus's Prometheus's plan for revenge against the Gotham City Police Department. Very broad, I know, but it does sort of give us a rough idea of what we could have expected. We also know what the start of the side mission would have looked like, with your first objective being to locate and rescue GCPD cops from a rigged police car. Hey, doesn't that remind you of an actual Season of Infamy quest that did end up making it into the final game? Yeah, Prometheus's DLC was presumably cut from Arkham Knight for being way too similar to Mad Hatter's Wonderland mission, or who knows, maybe Rocksteady decided to cut Prometheus's character, replace him with Mad Hatter, and just keep the entire side mission the same, which explains why they're so similar. Either way makes sense. We're not necessarily here to talk about his entire removed side mission though, so what about the cut boss fight specifically? Well, going back to the animations, these combat movements do fit Prometheus's character. Like I said, he's an anti-Batman who's basically on par with Bruce, both physically and mentally, so it makes sense that he would be able to go toe-to-toe with Batman, dodging and blocking his attacks in a hand-to-hand fight. Plus, he also wields a baton of sorts, which would definitely work as the one-handed weapon in the animations if it's truly not Zaz's knife. Like I said though, we're like 99.99% sure these animations are for Zaz and aren't Prometheus's just based on how perfect they fit with Zaz, but regardless, there's still a very small possibility, and I mean very small, that this could have been intended for Prometheus's boss fight instead. Also, even if they weren't his animations, he definitely still had a cut boss from Arkham Knight. The premise of that fight, how it would have played out, how the side mission would have concluded, we just don't know, and probably never will know, because the only actual evidence we have is this one basic text file. With that said, there's no way that Rocksteady was planning on introducing a character that is on par with Batman skill-wise in his very own dedicated side mission and not having it conclude with a boss fight of sorts, right? Also, side note, but I have to mention this really quick, when Ice Mage and I were looking through Pig's files, we came across a couple of unused animations from Pig's boss fight that were actually meant for him this time around. Ignore the Zaz character model, that's just what Ice Mage was using to record the other animations at the time, but it looks like Pig is leaning across the table with one hand while using a weapon in his other hand, right? Based on this, it seems highly likely that Pig was initially planned to have an extra attack to use against Batman, that being if the player got too close to his table, instead of just running away from you and playing cat and mouse, he would have actually reached across the table to swing his butcher knife at Batman. I mean, it's definitely not enough cut content to make Pig a spot on this list, but I thought that all of you might still find this unused attack from his boss fight at least somewhat interesting. Number 8. Mad Hatter's maze that was cut from Arkham Asylum. Now, Mad Hatter is a very prominent villain throughout the Arkham series, and one of my favorite characters. He has his own dedicated side mission in Arkham City, another side mission in Arkham Origins, and a DLC in Arkham Knight. The only Arkham game that he doesn't make an appearance in is Asylum, instead being relegated to a few brief references, but he wasn't originally planned to be absent from this game either. You see, it's been confirmed by the game's writer, Paul Dini, that Jervis was going to play a role in Arkham Asylum's story, as well as have a hedge maze boss fight of sorts. When you're making your way through the botanical gardens and trying to reach Poison Ivy, the original idea was for Mad Hatter and Ivy to work together and take control of a maze that was used to entertain children on Arkham Island. Batman would have to navigate his way through this maze, all while Poison Ivy controlled her plants in an attempt to slow the player down. Once Batman made his way through the entire maze, waiting at the center of it would be none other than Mad Hatter himself, where he'd be sitting at a table with a tea set. Yeah, this cut boss almost seems like a combination of aspects within Scarecrow's boss fight and the whole Titan plants that guide you to Ivy later on into the game. Now, not only did Paul Dini confirm this cut Mad Hatter appearance itself, but he also said that this entire maze boss fight of sorts ended up getting scrapped because Rocksteady couldn't figure out how to incorporate him into Arkham Asylum's story. And yeah, you know, that does make a lot of sense. Just sitting here right now, I myself can't think of a way they could have implemented Mad Hatter's character into the story here and have it not feel super forced or shoehorned in. So even though this hedge maze definitely would have been cool to see, I honestly think it was for the best that it ended up getting cut. With that said, it wasn't removed from Arkham Asylum entirely. You see, in the botanical gardens, you can find this tea set that's actually a scannable riddle for Jervis. Apparently, data miners have been able to find that this very asset was in use at some point for the hedge maze, so yep, The tea set that was planned to be at the center of the maze originally was repurposed into a Mad Hatter riddle later on, meaning that this is the only thing that remains of Jervis's cut boss. Yeah, even though we don't know too much about it outside of what Paul Dini has officially revealed, it is still cool to see that the concept of the maze and how it was tied into Poison Ivy with the whole botanical gardens and all did still end up making it into Arkham Asylum's final release in some shape or form. Number 9. Penguin and Deathstroke boss fights in Arkham Origins. Now, unlike the rest of what we've covered so far, this next one isn't just a single cut boss fight per se, more so just a lot of content that was cut before, during, and after Deathstroke's boss battle all conglomerated together because I still think it's super interesting to talk about. Once again, we're using the pre-alpha build of Arkham Origins to see all of this content that was cut before the game's final release, which means huge shout out to Wastelander121 for letting me use their footage of all this. So when you're making your way through Penguin's ship, The Final Offer, you eventually confront Oswald in his office, beat up his men, interrogate him for info on Black Mask, and then Deathstroke surprises you with the remote claw, leading into the boss fight itself, right? Well, for starters, in the base game during this office fight, Penguin obviously just hides in the corner, cowering, while he orders his men to attack you. However, unlike the final release, in the pre-alpha footage, we can clearly see that Penguin was originally supposed to fight alongside his men in this encounter, instead of running away and hiding. It appears that he was going to be a lot like the Joker mini-boss in Arkham City, where you can't just use a takedown on him or knock Oswald unconscious, you just have to deal with him attacking you throughout the whole fight until you've eventually cleared the entire room. Now, once you finish the fight, you then interrogate Penguin like I said, and in the finished version of Arkham Origins, Batman and Oswald's dialogue goes like this.
Black Mask, put a bounty on my head. Where is he?
I don't keep tabs on every geezer with a grudge. You're not a popular bloke in this town.
You're running out of time.
Wait. Lacey Towers. There was a murder. It was supposed to be his same house. Or Black Mask. He's got problems of his own, I'd say. Someone broke in there.
Well, this conversation was planned to be very different because in the pre-alpha build, the two say this instead.
New guy in town. Put a bounty on my head. Who is he?
It could be any geezer with a grudge. You're not a popular bloke in this town.
You're running out of time. Give me a name.
Wait. Lacey Towers. There was a murder. Ain't nothing goes down in this city without me knowing. And I never got word of this till after it happened. It could be it's someone new.
So yeah, originally it wasn't going to be Black Mask who put up the $50 million bounty to kill Batman, but rather the new guy in town, foreshadowing Joker's big reveal, which is definitely really interesting. Anyways, after the whole interrogation scene ends abruptly with Slade interrupting us, which side note looks a lot different in the pre-alpha as well, but I think this was just some early development stuff and not an actual arena change, let's move on to Deathstroke's boss fight itself. Alright, so as far as this battle goes, the concept shown in the pre-alpha build is very similar to what we got in the final release of Arkham Origins, meaning there wasn't some major rework, but there were definitely quite a few tweaks. In the actual game, Slade is the only one who says anything, right?
You'll regret that.
Well, in the pre-alpha, we can actually see that the original idea was for Batman to make some remarks back at Deathstroke throughout the boss battle too, and even have Penguin chime in as well, cheering on Slade as he watches the entire fight from above. Now, not only was a good chunk of this dialogue cut, but so were a lot of the back and forth animations. In fact, here's what the first beat 'em up transition was supposed to look like where Batman shatters Deathstroke's mask.
Dare you?
Here's what the second one was supposed to look like, where Batman breaks Slade's staff. And here's what the third and final beatdown originally looked like to finish the boss fight. There's even more animations that got cut before the game's final release throughout the boss battle, mostly for the back and forth counter moments between Batman and Deathstroke, and some of these are really cool if I'm being honest. Not sure why they were made, only to go completely unused. With that though, that's just about it for Deathstroke's boss fight itself, but we're still not done talking about this section, oh no. As soon as the fight is over and Batman's won, we all know how the ending plays out in the finished version of Arkham Origins, but the pre-alpha once again reveals that there was a lot of dialogue lines cut from the sequence, so I've actually done my best here to implement it back into the game.
It's over, Slade.
I have enhanced strength, speed, intellect. You. What are you?
I'm Batman.
Mr. Cobblepot,
What?
maybe we should...
In case you didn't catch it yet, yeah, that's a completely different voice actor for Deathstroke in the pre-alpha as well, which is yet another thing that is very interesting to see all these years later. Now, after this whole sequence though, you obviously unlock the remote claw, try to get back up to Penguin's office, only for the door to be locked, blocking your entry, right? Well, in the pre-alpha build of the game, you could actually enter the office again instead of being stuck behind a locked door, where you could even throw a few more punches at Penguin before he starts cowering on the ground. I'm not sure if this was actually intended to be put into the final game or is just some weird pre-alpha bug, because it does seem kinda strange, but yeah, this definitely would have been funny had it made it into the finished version. Really reminds me of the whole knocking out Oswald as Bruce Wayne during the beginning of Arkham City. One thing that does make me think it was probably intentional though is the fact that unlike the final version, Penguin actually had an elevator inside of his office in the pre-alpha, and it seems like you were going to have to use this elevator to go down a floor, walk through the hallway and interact with this door, which would trigger this exact conversation with Penguin, instead of, you know, just playing on a projector out here in the boiler room. Since this place seems to be only accessible through Penguin's office, yeah, it definitely makes sense that you'd have to go back through this way if this hadn't have been changed before Origins came out. Overall, like I said, there were no major reworks or some massive cut content like the rest of the boss fights on this list, but it is really cool to see just how much was changed in this entire section while Arkham Origins was still in development. While I would say that a lot of it was probably cut for the better, some of this stuff definitely would have been an upgrade over the finished product, I can't lie. Number 10. Clayface's return in potentially cut boss battle from Arkham Knight. Alright, so with this boss comes a lot of my own personal speculation and not much actual proof since everything was presumably cut from the game. Just keep that in mind as we make our way through it. Now, we pretty much know for a fact that Clayface was a removed villain from Arkham Knight. In the gameplay demo that was shown prior to the game's release, some people were able to spot a billboard with a picture of Clayface coming soon, which was cut out entirely because you can't actually find this billboard in the final version of Arkham Knight. Also, in one of the concept arts, we can clearly see Clayface climbing around the buildings outside of Panessa Studios, so this idea of Clayface being around Panessa was clearly being explored by the devs. In fact, that's not even the only hint to Clayface at Panessa, because there are a ton of Basil Carlo Easter egg posters hanging up all over the movie studios, obviously referencing Clayface while he was still an actor. I even made a theory video on why I believed that this back room at Panessa was potentially an Easter egg for Clayface if it wasn't actually meant for Zsasz, which I recommend checking out that video for more details, but just to summarize, this room was clearly broken into by something very large considering the sheer size of this door and the amount of damage it sustained. There's a boat docked outside that looks identical to the ones from Arkham City, as if someone from Arkham City had taken it here, and to top it off, I even found this weird substance all over the room that seems to resemble clay. All of these small little details hinting at his return, the fact that Clayface is very familiar with Panessa considering he's a former actor, and the concept art literally showing him at the movie studios, I really do think it's highly plausible that a Clayface boss fight of sorts would have taken place here. Plus, has anyone else ever thought it was weird how you can find and collect the Freeze Blast optionally while it's just lying on some random table, instead of making it have any sort of use at all outside of a couple Riddler trophies? I feel like it screams, oh, we originally planned on having a use for this gadget, maybe Clayface, but we didn't end up going with that, so since it's already in the game, here you go. That's not to mention that it's also inside of Panessa Studios. Not the clock tower, not dropped off by the Batwing, not in either Wayne Tower buildings, not the GCPD where the retcon is, but at the movie studios, where Clayface's supposed cut boss fight would have taken place. I don't know, this all just seems like way too much of a coincidence for it not to be deliberately planned. So with all of that said, if there truly was a cut Clayface appearance and boss battle at Panessa, here's how I think it would have went. After GCPD collected Clayface's dry mud samples from Arkham City, where he was still alive within the mud but unable to take form, the police gave the samples to Batman so they could try healing him. So Bruce took what was left of Clayface to the movie studios for him and Robin to run tests and work on restoring Clayface back into his former self, and they managed to save Carlo from his fate worse than death, holding him securely inside of a high-tech cell because he was still mentally unstable. However, once Harley broke in and set him free, he went ballistic outside of the movie studios in a giant form because his mind wasn't set straight yet, kind of like his counterpart from Gotham Knights, or even Sandman from Spider-Man 2, just for a rough comparison, leading perfectly into the boss fight where Batman has to defeat him. So for the actual boss fight itself, my guess is that you would have originally prepared for the battle by having to run inside Panessa to collect the freeze blast, followed by heading right back outside to start the fight. Now, considering the fact that this parking lot area is very wide open and already designed for Batmobile fights, plus all of the Batmobile jumps and power winches already in place here as well, my guess is you would have had to go around in battle mode to shoot at giant Clayface as he scaled the tall buildings, attacking and throwing clay at you, very similar to his long-range moveset from Arkham City. Whether the freeze blasts would have been utilized via Batman somehow shooting them out of the Batmobile at Clayface, or him merely damaging Clayface and then getting out of the car to throw freeze blasts himself, either could work as the premise of the boss fight until Clayface was completely frozen, blown to bits, and successfully defeated. Look, I know that's a whole lot of speculation and theory crafting on my part without much hard proof, but I feel like given the Clayface evidence, the Panessa Studios concept art, the design of this area, and the freeze blast conveniently being placed here with next to no use at all, it makes a ton of sense and something along these lines is definitely possible. Number 11. Bane's cut content within all 3 of his boss battles in Arkham Origins. As we know, Bane had 3 different fights with the player in the release version of Arkham Origins. You first fight him on the hotel rooftop, which is one of the best boss fights in the series and I won't hear otherwise. At the end of the game, you fight him at Blackgate inside the Panopticon for a similar style fight, and then immediately after, you fight TN1 Bane in a stealth section to ultimately defeat him for good. Now, while all 3 of these encounters were pretty much always the planned boss battles for Bane, at least to my knowledge, thanks to the pre-alpha version of Arkham Origins, of course thank you to Wolf Gaming, Wastelander121, and the Adam Smith once again for letting me use this footage of theirs, we can clearly see that some of the original concepts for these battles were removed entirely prior to the final release. Now, I'm just gonna say it right now, TN1 Bane had a vastly different boss fight to the point where it's barely even recognizable in comparison to the fight we actually got. So before we start deep diving into all of that cut content, I first want to talk about Bane's 2 combat bosses just to get those out of the way. Alright, so for starters, remember the classic Bane Train move that Bane would do multiple times in his rooftop fight and the Panopticon battle? Yeah, Bane doesn't have that attack in the pre-alpha build of the game. That's very interesting. Obviously, I don't know for sure, but considering everything else in this boss fight seemed like it was pretty much done for the pre-alpha, I think it's safe to bet that the Bane Train attack wasn't originally intended for this fight and was something WB Montreal added in later. Now, the next 2 cut features don't have that much to do with Bane's moveset, more so just some animation changes. In the regular game, when you do a dive over Bane, it looks the same as all your other evades, right? Well, the original concept for this was that when Batman would dive over the top of Bane, he'd use his legs and push off of Bane's back in order to create some extra distance. On the other hand, you know how when you finish a phase of Bane's combat boss, it triggers this attack animation? Yeah, well, in the pre-alpha, the animation was slightly different where there wasn't a back and forth. Rather, Bane just held onto Batman while he powered himself up with Venom. Doesn't seem like much, but when you remember that in Origins, this very animation is what leads into his Bane Train attack, since the Bane Train wasn't a thing yet in the pre-alpha, that could explain why this animation ended up getting changed while the game was in development. Yeah, I'm really not sure why some of these mechanics were cut in the first place, because they seemed pretty cool and really only worked to add more depth to the fight. With that said, the reality is they were just a few minor changes though. Nothing was cut that really impacts the entire battle here overall. At least, that's the case for the combat boss fights, because like I said, Bane's final encounter has way more cut content. You see, right after you beat Bane in the Panopticon, he takes a dose of TN1 Venom that turns him into this absolute monster of a man, and then you obviously have to play through this whole stealth encounter to defeat him for good, right? You sneak around him using the vents and grates to get in takedowns, utilize the electric walls to deal even more damage, and then to finish the fight, you have to play through this quicktime event to ultimately beat Bane and win the battle. Well, this boss was originally planned to look very different from the one we actually received in Arkham Origins, because just taking a look at the pre-alpha, we can already see that the fight takes place in an entirely different arena that is much more similar to that of regular Predator encounters. Gargoyles, ledges, multiple floor levels, everything. Yeah, this is definitely really cool. I mean, this is essentially a completely unique stealth room that was fully designed by the devs and close to being ready to use, but never did make it into the final game because it was cut and replaced with the cell blocks. Now, as for the boss fight itself though, the battle would begin with Alfred telling Batman that he can't face TN1 Bane in melee, and unlike the finished version of Arkham Origins, the electric walls you need to use to defeat Bane aren't getting any electricity, meaning the first objective was to analyze the room and power on the main generator. To do this, you'd throw a remote control batarang, make sure it goes through the electricity here, and then guide it into this little area to hit the box, which would turn on the power and also activate this crane, which might not seem like much now, but it'll be very important later on into the fight, so just keep that in mind. Now after all of this, you're not done with the power just yet, because even though the main generator is now on, every single electricity outlet, or whatever you want to call them, needed to be activated by Batman manually, where you'd need to go down to the lowest floor and press the button yourself. Yeah, it seems like these weren't going to be actual cells for prisoners like they are in the final game, but rather just various electrical items all around, and considering that Batman had to physically walk up and turn each one on before using it, my guess is that this was to force the player to get off their vantage point so you actually feel endangered by TN1 Bane, like he could be right behind you at any moment while you're doing this. Speaking of Bane, while you're busy with the generators and turning on the electricity, he's obviously patrolling the entire room. And his hunt for Batman is cranked up to a whole nother degree here in the pre-alpha, because with his new TN1 strength, Bane could quickly jump up and down over ledges and between the different floor levels just like that. In fact, he wasn't just looking for you, he was also smelling for you. Now, while this was a mechanic that did end up staying in the game in some shape or form before Arkham Origins launched, you've probably even noticed Bane sniffing around for Batman before while playing. As you can see here in the pre-alpha, it was originally intended to work completely differently. Whenever Batman had this weird orange aura around him, I believe that this was meant to represent Bane sniffing out your location and him knowing exactly where you're hiding now, meaning that you could definitely not stay in one place for too long. You might say, oh, at least the gargoyles are safe, in which case you would be very wrong. After he detects you on a vantage point, not only could TN1 Bane rip out giant chunks of concrete wall to hurl at you, which is most definitely a callback to his Arkham Asylum boss fight by the way, but he could also super jump off the ground to knock you down himself. I mean, just look at this clip. Adam was literally just using a remote control batarang on top of the starting vantage point and hadn't moved an inch since the fight began, only for Bane to somehow detect him all the way up here, instantly do a super jump, and just completely body him and the gargoyle. I mean, this is an insane attack. Now, as far as actually defeating TN1 Bane though, you'd of course utilize all of the power sources after you turn them on, and weirdly enough, this was the only way to defeat him. What I mean by that is in the final release, even though it does do less damage, you can obviously still use basic takedowns on Bane without actually tossing him into the electric walls, right? Well, thanks to the pre-alpha, we can clearly see that the original idea was to have these normal takedowns do absolutely nothing to TN1 Bane's health bar. Yeah, there was no slamming Bane into regular walls, there was no riding Bane and then throwing him into electricity. It was simply, Bane has to be in a takedown position or right next to a power source that's already been manually turned on by the player, or else no damage whatsoever. Honestly, kinda glad that got cut. So basically, how the fight went was you just keep luring TN1 Bane into different electric areas all around the room, set up into a takedown when he's in position, and after he's briefly weakened, you could start your beatdown much like in the final game, but unlike the final game, there was a cut feature here. At the very end of your beatdown, Bane would actually try to attack you, forcing the player to counter before they could make a run for it, or else you'd take some massive damage. From there, it's just rinse and repeat doing electric takedowns over and over again, and eventually, Batman will prompt you through dialogue to use the crane. To do this, you'd have to make your way to the top floor of the Predator room and take out your Batclaw to pull the crane down. From there, Bane would then walk over and be in prime position almost directly under the crane, so using the Batclaw once more to set up a finishing move, the crane would swing, Batman would actually jump onto it and slam the crane into Bane, and then add in an extra kick at the end for good measure, leading into one last beatdown. But wait, this time Bane counters, throws you through the wall, and outside of the whole pipe on top of Batman that you'd have to throw off of yourself, which was obviously a cut part, the boss fight would end very similarly to how it ends in the release version of Arkham Origins, with Batman shooting the remote claw and attaching Bane to the electricity. Wow, how about that though? The whole crane sequence is just so freaking cool. Yeah, I get why the devs had to remove it. After all, they did do an entire rework to the boss arena, and there wouldn't have been enough room to pull something like this off in the cell blocks anyways, but man, I wish this was still in the game, I can't lie. Other than that though, I think I prefer the TN1 Bane boss fight that the devs ultimately went with, as opposed to the unreleased version in the pre-alpha. I personally think it just works better. I mean, the whole section is about being tracked down by this monstrous Bane, and at his mercy, you're stuck on ground level with Bane as he stomps around menacingly. He can destroy your hiding spots like vents and grates. It's hard to figure out where he is once the detective mode jammer activates. All of this just creates such an unsettling atmosphere for the player, and like you're always at risk. Even if TN1 Bane had the ability to navigate floor levels extremely quickly and find you on top of the gargoyles every now and then, I still feel like the boss fight would be less intense and not carry that same atmosphere. So while I do think it would have been cool to face Bane in a much more traditional Predator encounter, as well as be able to pull off moves like this using the crane here, I'm overall happy with the version of TN1 Bane that we got. Like I said, that's just my own personal preference though, so which version of TN1 Bane do you think was better? Interested in hearing all of your guys' thoughts on this. Number 12. Poison Ivy's alternate attack, cut from Arkham City. A bit of a shorter one, but I still think that this cut content is very interesting and worthy of a spot on this list. So right after Batman gets captured by Joker near the beginning of the game, Catwoman's second DLC chapter begins, and your objective is to go to Selina's apartment, grab her stuff, and then head over to Poison Ivy's hideout where we have a boss battle against her, right? Now this fight is fairly basic. If I'm being honest, it's not even much of a boss fight because Poison Ivy doesn't really do much. Or at least she doesn't really do much in the release version of the game. If you remember back to Ivy's boss battle in Arkham Asylum, she had two different attacks. The giant spores that she would shoot at you, as well as the thorn roots that would come out of the ground and grab hold of Batman if you didn't get out of the way in time. In Arkham City, the shooting spores clearly did make a return, but the thorn vines are nowhere to be seen. Well, thanks to Mr. Jag who was able to recover this, we can actually hear some cut Poison Ivy dialogue that seems to reference those very thorn roots as if Catwoman was caught in them. Listen to this.
You should really be more careful, Selina. Careless little cat, all tied up and ready to drown. Don't struggle. It will be over quicker. You're caught in my trap. My plants will break your bones, crush your skull, and bury you in the dirt. Can you feel my plants crushing your spine?
So yeah, it's extremely likely that the thorn roots were originally planned to be a part of Ivy's moveset in this boss fight alongside her regular spore attack, but it was cut from the game for who knows what reason. On one hand, I'm kinda happy these vines were removed because they were really annoying in Arkham Asylum, but on the other hand, like I said, this is a very limited boss fight and Poison Ivy definitely should have had more attacks in her moveset. Considering that it sounds like they had already planned and implemented this extra attack with dialogue, Rocksteady probably should have just stuck with it instead of cutting it out entirely if I'm being honest. Number 13. Poison Ivy's betrayal boss fight potentially cut from Arkham Knight. While we're on the topic of Poison Ivy, I figured we'd just throw her other boss fight in here as well, because why not? This is another one like the Clayface boss that we were talking about earlier, where we don't actually have any evidence in the game files or from the devs to necessarily prove that a Poison Ivy boss fight was removed from Arkham Knight, but there are a ton of environmental details in the game itself that make it seem highly plausible. Remember how, during the main campaign, you have to transport Ivy from the GCPD all the way to the botanical gardens on Miyagani Island? Well, surprisingly, if you take a look around, this entire upper area of the botanical gardens is filled with interactables for a Predator sequence. A 3-leveled, spread out room, tons of grates connecting the inside floors, multiple gargoyles to grapple around along with ropes all over the outside to hang on, climbable ladders, service hatches. I mean, this place has everything for a stealth encounter. The crazy part, even though all of this is here, not once is it ever used. In the final release, there's never a Predator sequence, a militia base, or any kind of mission whatsoever that takes place in this fully fleshed out area of the botanical gardens. You know what that means? Everything here 100% points to some sort of stealth section that was cut from the game, and even though we can't confirm this, the fact that it's literally Ivy's hideout definitely makes it seem possible that it was meant for her in some way. So, a removed Predator boss battle against Poison Ivy herself? Potentially. I mean, with Arkham Knight's severe lack of boss battles in the final product, I can imagine that an Ivy fight was being discussed by the devs at one point or another. After all, there are very few villains that are actually present throughout Arkham Knight's main story, and most of the ones who were introduced were then reserved for side missions, so if Rocksteady was originally planning more boss fights throughout the main campaign, and Ivy being one of the few Batman villains to frequently show up in the main story, I think you can put 2 and 2 together. Just me sitting here brainstorming right now, I could very well envision an entire stealth encounter here with a bunch of Ivy's mind-controlled goons that you'd have to take down, very similar to Arkham City, except this time around, she has a giant plant that fights alongside them in some way and is an actual boss. Now, while that definitely would have been cool, the only issue is this. How exactly would a Poison Ivy boss battle fit into the story? Isn't she literally working together with Batman? Well, the only way I think this could possibly be explained is to make Ivy have an Arkham City Mr. Freeze-like betrayal, where she was only working with us until she had the upper hand, leading into a boss fight where ultimately, upon defeating her, Ivy would give up and start working with us again. Sure, that'd definitely feel a bit forced and would certainly take away from her eventual sacrifice, but I think it could theoretically work to ensure a dedicated boss fight for Ivy while still semi-falling in line with the story. With that being said, I think the fight would pretty much have to be early on into the main campaign if it were to happen, and even then it wouldn't fit perfectly into the plot, but who knows, maybe it was like the Mad Hatter section that we were talking about earlier, where the fight got cut from the game for that very reason since it conflicted with the story. I'm sure there's some of you out there that are convinced, while a lot of others are probably saying something like, oh, a Poison Ivy boss fight? This entire stealth area was probably just a cut militia base and not anything special. Yeah, the one problem with that is that there's already a militia checkpoint directly below this Predator room, and I highly doubt that the original plan was to have 2 checkpoints so close to each other to the point where they're basically connected and could overlap if you accidentally fell down into the other base for some reason. Sure, that could also be the reason it was removed from the game in the first place, but even so, a Poison Ivy boss fight here does make sense. I mean, after all, this is literally her base of operations for most of the story until she ends up dying, not to mention all of the other potential evidence with how Arkham Knight's bosses were probably planned. However, let's be honest for a second though, I would probably say that the most likely option here is that this cut area was just going to be a regular stealth encounter, but was eventually taken out of the game for who knows what reason. If I had to take a guess, I think it'd be a follow-up to the Protect Ivy mission, where much like the final game, you have to take out the first wave of drones, a second wave of Cobra tanks, but instead of just ending there, maybe it's revealed that while you were busy with the Cobras, a group of armed militia made their way into the gardens to hunt down Ivy on foot? Who knows, but the reality is that there was definitely a cut stealth mission here of some sort. With how detailed this entire area is with all of the interactables we're used to seeing in Predator encounters, fully fleshed out level design, a large room with a completed interior and exterior to move back and forth, I mean, come on, that's a guarantee. Now, whether or not it was actually a cut Poison Ivy boss fight is up to you, because we'll probably never know either way, and it is still fun to speculate. Let me know what you think. Number 14. Black Mask's accidentally cut boss fight in Arkham Origins. In one of the side missions for Arkham Origins, your goal is to find and destroy each and every single one of Black Mask's drug stashes across Gotham, right? Well, in the last part of the mission, when you go to the church, take out all of the gunmen, and then destroy the last remaining canister, Black Mask himself comes into the room to confront you alongside a bunch of his men that fight with him. Now, Sionis isn't really anything more than a normal thug in this fight. He's basically the combat equivalent to Two-Face's Predator section in the Kingston Bank, so I'd go as far to say that this isn't even a boss battle and more so just a regular encounter. But it wasn't always planned to be like that though. You see, thanks to Darksheep once again, who was able to find some very interesting things in the game files, apparently Black Mask was supposed to have a full-on health bar in this fight to signify him being an actual boss, kind of like how they did it in his Arkham Knight DLC fight, just for reference. On top of that, in the release version of Arkham Origins, Sionis just reuses the same animations that regular thugs have, which is why he looks kinda wonky, but turns out WB Montreal originally created an entirely unique set of combat animations specifically for Black Mask in this fight. Yep, he was supposed to be an actual boss battle with a full-on health bar, unique attack animations, all that jazz. Unfortunately for us, despite all of this being here in the game files, completely done, none of it ever made it into the final release of the game for whatever reason, most likely because the devs literally just forgot about it. So with that said, can we even consider this a cut boss fight? Because it technically wasn't really cut, it was probably accidentally left out. Either way, I don't think it matters all that much. At best, this would have been a minor upgrade over what we got, something more on par with his DLC boss in Arkham Knight like I said, but the reality is it still would have been a very simple, pretty forgettable boss fight. Looking back on it now though, it definitely is interesting to see what they originally had in mind for Black Mask. Number 15, the player's final boss fight against Batman that was removed from Arkham Knight. Let's end off on one of the coolest cut bosses on this entire list, shall we? So we all know how Arkham Knight ends. Scarecrow manages to capture Robin, Batman surrenders himself to Crane in order to save Tim and Gordon, and once Batman's mask comes off, Scarecrow gives Bruce another round of fear toxin, which is finally enough to make him succumb to the Joker disease. Now, nothing throughout that whole section was cut or changed, at least to my knowledge, but where the cut content actually begins is when you start going through the whole fear gas-induced nightmare while playing as Joker within Bruce's mind. You see, in the final game, there's not really much of a transition between Batman becoming Joker. It's pretty instantaneous as soon as you get injected by Scarecrow, right? However, thanks to even more unused audio that Mr. Jag found in the game files, it seems like there was going to be a much bigger back and forth between the two, with Bruce doing his best to barely hold on while Joker overpowers him, all the way until Batman finally loses his own mind to Joker.
Don't fight it, Bats! Just close your eyes and relax! It's gonna be fun! Now, you may feel a slight choking sensation, followed by a long period of violence and killing. Hold still, you big lump! I'm in control now!
Now, whether this was you playing as Joker and finally defeating Batman yourself, or another struggle sequence while you're still playing as Bruce, only this time around you end up losing it, that's up in the air and we'll probably never know, but it certainly would have been really cool either way. With that said, that's just the beginning of all of this cut content, I'm not even kidding. In the final release of Arkham Knight, Joker obviously just uses a regular shotgun during these first-person shooter moments while you're playing as him, right? Well, according to Darksheep, his weapon was originally going to be a lot more fun to use, I'll put it that way. Instead of being a boring shotgun, it was actually going to be a, quote, nuke gun. Now, this nuke gun wouldn't exactly fire nukes, but rather shoot explosive green beams wherever you were aiming. Now, what exactly would you have to do with this nuke gun, you might ask? Not sure, but I think we can assume it would have definitely been very destructive. Makes you wonder if us as the players were originally going to get to go around Gotham ourselves and actually be the ones to obliterate the city as Joker. I doubt it, because that probably would have had some major issues with the pacing and all, but it still would have been awesome. Even if you couldn't go around destroying Gotham in its entirety though, we do know about a certain part of the city that was for sure cut from this fear toxin sequence. You see, Instead of just being able to hunt down and kill the villains, the initial plan was for you as Joker to actually make your way through the whole GCPD building, killing all of the cops inside as well. We even have more unused Joker dialogue that matches this, where you can listen to him mention the cops.
All these police officers stuck down here on their own. How about we fill this cell up and give them some company?
As well as how the holding cells in the GCPD are empty, and I wonder why.
Lovely decor, but it could do with a few nefarious characters scattered around the place. A couple of throw pillows, and maybe some of those scented candles. It's looking a little empty in here, Bats. Someone needs to pull their finger out.
Yeah, I guess the whole brutally murdering Gotham's finest with a laser gun wasn't too appropriate for a game that was trying really hard to get a PG-13 rating, huh? So instead of including this part of the Fear Nightmare, it seems like Rocksteady opted to cut most of it and just leave in the very end, where Gordon dies, Joker walks out of the door to leave the police department, and is now standing outside with the GCPD building directly behind him. I really wish this part wasn't cut from the game, because this whole sequence sounds like it would have been amazing. Remember, it may look like we're playing as Joker here, but really, this is actually Batman if he had succumbed to the Joker disease. The most dangerous man on the planet, wielding insane weapons like the nuke gun that was probably Wayne Tech, his redesigned Batmobile, everything that made Batman Batman, but also accompanied by extremely violent impulses, a complete lack of a moral code, and a sheer desire to create chaos and destruction just like the Joker. This was clearly Batman's greatest fear. He himself becoming a mass killer with nothing to keep him in check, and while that is kind of explored in the final release, it's not nearly to the degree it would have been had a lot of the content here not been cut. You know, murdering his own allies in the GCPD, utilizing advanced tech that nobody could stop. Basically, it would have been like seeing Batman's true greatest fears in full, not just a short glimpse of them while killing a couple of villains before shifting back to the real world. But wait, as soon as we end the first Nightmare section, Jokerized Batman gets dosed again by Scarecrow, meaning we're now going through Joker's worst fears while sort of battling against Batman in his own mind this time around. And what do you know, a lot of content was cut from this entire sequence as well. In the final release of Arkham Knight, Batman obviously takes a much more patient approach to defeat Joker here, not actually showing himself until the very end, where he chooses to twist Joker's perception and mess with his thoughts instead. I can't lie, this entire section is certainly very creepy because you know you're being stalked by Batman the whole time, but you know what's even scarier? Actually being hunted by Batman. Yep, at the end of this section, there was meant to be an actual boss fight against Batman himself.
Are you ready, Joker? It's your turn to feel fear.
A boss fight that you couldn't win.
Ah, you gotta be kidding me. What have I got to be afraid of? Not some rich little orphan in pointy-eared funeral wear, still crying for Mummy and Daddy.
Now, for the boss battle, Batman would be lurking in the shadows in typical stealth fashion, constantly emerging to attack and do tons of takedowns on you as Joker before fleeing away again. Yeah, unlike the entire rest of the game, it would actually be us players on the opposite end of a Batman takedown. Absolutely brutal. We even have Joker's cut dialogue lines that I would assume were meant to trigger right after every takedown Batman did on him. He'd take you down, cue the dialogue.
This is not how it's going to end. Without me, you're just a Neanderthal in a rubber suit wondering why all his friends are becoming extinct.
He'd take you down again.
There's nothing left for you, Bats. It's time to embrace your Joker side.
And again.
You can't hurt me. You're like a paranoid schizophrenic bashing his head against the wall, hoping it'll make the voices stop.
And again.
You're relentless. You never know when you're beaten. But your fate was sealed the moment I entered your bloodstream.
All the way until the boss battle was over.
Back off, Bats! Get away! Die, damn it! Just die!
Wow, how about that? What a sequence. Look, I can understand why they decided to remove the whole GCPD Nightmare section, or replace the nuke gun with a regular old shotgun, but come on man, absolutely banger dialogue from Joker, an incredibly terrifying Batman with lines like this.
Are you ready, Joker? It's your turn to feel fear.
And an unbeatable boss fight against none other than Arkham Batman himself to beat the game and conclude the entire Arkham series overall. Don't get me wrong, what we got for this section was still great, but how did this get cut? Overall, there were so many really great boss battles from the Arkham series that, unfortunately for us, were either reworked to be much more simple or just scrapped from the games entirely. Yeah, it truly is sad to see just how much we missed out on, and even though a couple of these I think were probably cut for the best, I myself really wish we could have gotten most of them, especially the full version of Jason's fight, the scrapped mini-boss Clay enemy that would have been able to eat you, and of course Batman's unbeatable boss fight, because all of those would have been so cool. I mean, when you think about Arkham Knight specifically, it's usually regarded as the worst in the series as far as bosses go, right? Well, if most of these hadn't have been cut, like Harley, Zaz, Jason's much better boss, the game really could have been outstanding in the boss fights department, maybe even the best in the series. It's just such a shame that so many of these cool battles were removed before launch, only to leave things like Deathstroke's tank fight in the game for whatever reason, but I digress. Once again, I just want to shout out everybody who helped me put this video together, because this was very much a team effort. So huge thank you to Ice Mage for putting in so much time dedicated to data mining, giving me info, explanations, and walking me through a lot of this stuff, and of course for restoring a ton of cut content back into the game for me to share with you all. Trust me, this video wouldn't have been the same without him. Another big thank you to Dark Sheep, who data mined a good chunk of the cut bosses covered in this video as well. If he hadn't have been kind enough to let me use so much material from him, I don't know what I would have done. Same goes for Mr. Jag. Once again, he was able to find so much unused audio in the game files directly related to these cut boss fights that it's kind of insane. Huge shout out to him. Even more thank yous to everybody who let me use their Arkham Origins pre-alpha footage, Wolf Gaming, Wastelander121, and the Atom Smith, which was really cool to showcase by the way. And one last thank you to SSG, who was nice enough to go through my whole list of cut bosses while everything was still in the planning phase in order to fact check everything. All of their links are down below. As you've seen throughout this video, they clearly do great work, whether it be modding, content creation, or anything along those lines. And of course, I just want to thank everybody who made it this far into the video. I know this one was a really long watch, by far my longest on the channel, so it truly does mean the world to me that you thought this was worth that much of your time and stuck it out for the entire thing. If you did enjoy all of these cut boss fights though, I don't typically ask this, but it would really help me out a lot if you hit the thumbs up or leave a comment about which boss fight was your favorite, just so this video can get some extra engagement and hopefully reach as many Arkham fans as possible. But other than that, once again, thank you so much for watching, subscribe for more, and I'll see you later.